Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Thank you for joining us today or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from around the world. The Fowler is proud to present today's program, Muslim Prayer Boards of West Africa, as part of our Vital Matters Stories of Belief series. Vital Matters programs explore objects that arouse devotion, awe, or serenity, mediate relationships between human and spiritual realms, and are of vital importance to the cultural heritage of individuals and communities. This series accompanies the new digital initiative, Vital Matters Stories of Belief, a platform for sharing different perspectives on devotional works at the Fowler Museum. Muslim prayer boards combine divine arts with practical purposes. Made of wood and inscribed with a reed pen, they help young Muslims commit to memory words of God. When the boards are washed for reuse, the water bears blessings that, if imbibed or applied to afflicted bodies, can console, heal, and bring hope. The Fowler is pleased to welcome Amira Hassnaoui, who will share her ongoing doctoral research involving people of West African descent in southern Tunisia, and Alan F. Roberts, who will discuss religious practices he and Polly Nooter Roberts studied for their 2003 Fowler exhibition, A Saint in the City, Sufi Arts of Urban Senegal. Vital Matters Stories of Belief is generously supported by a grant from the Lilly Endowment Inc. Before we get going, a little bit about our guests. Amira Hassnaoui was born in Tunis, Tunisia. She received her BA in English Literature and Civilization from the Higher Institute of Human Sciences of Tunis in 2011, and her MA in English Literature and Civilization from the Superior Institute of Human Sciences of Tunis in 2014. She is currently a fourth-year PhD student and a teaching associate in the Department of World Arts and Culture Stance at UCLA, and also serves as Director of Publications at the UCLA Graduate Student Association. She's also editor at Ufahamu, a journal of African studies, one of the oldest African studies journals in North America. Al Roberts is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of World Arts and Cultures at UCLA. His recent projects as a humanistic anthropologist include editing and writing for the Fowler publication Striking Iron, The Art of African Blacksmiths in 2019, and his prize-winning monograph, A Dance of Assassins, Performing Early Colonial Hegemony in the Congo from 2013. Roberts has co-edited Devotional Spaces of a Global Saint, Shirdi Sai Baba's Presence, in a 2022 publication dedicated to the memory of Polly Nooter Roberts, who died in 2018, and was Professor of World Arts and Cultures, Consulting Curator of African Art at LACMA, and Deputy Director of the Fowler Museum from 1999 to 2009. Before we get going, a few technical tidbits of housekeeping. Once the screen sharing begins, please click View Options and then select side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. And if you have any questions during this program, please do submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you'd like to be considered at the end of the program. All right, that's all from me. Over to you, Al.
Oops.
Hey, Al, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon as we start the afternoon here in Los Angeles. And I'm going to just give you a few sort of preliminary comments about the ways that writing is understood and used in Muslim communities, especially in Senegal, in the case that I'm going to present. And then we'll turn things over to Amira. So let me do this. So I will start with this picture, which combines a kind of sublime architecture of the word, as I'll explain in just a couple of minutes here, but that also points out that even in sublime places, people have to dry their clothes. This presentation is dedicated to Polly's memory and is based on the project that Bianca mentioned, the Fowler exhibition and book project called A Saint in the City, Sufi Arts of Urban Senegal, that Polly and I worked on from the mid-90s and in some ways, the project continues still. It's been a long-term endeavor. One of the things that came out of the exhibition is an understanding on our part, and of course, these were ideas that were shared with us by our Senegalese friends, that writing has a very important significance among Muslims in general, but among Sufis in particular. So Sufis are people practicing the mystical heart of Islam. And one of the things about writing, of course, is that this is how one can look for bridges between Islam and the other Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Christianity, because writing is significant in similar ways. For Muslims, letters are vital. They carry a kind of living presence, and the act of writing is also a kind of way of convening with God, especially as one uses Arabic script. So here on the left is the only known photograph of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, who lived from 1853 until 1927. And he is the center force and kind of learning spot for the Murid Sufi movement, which is a Sufi movement local to Senegal. One of the things about the image of Ahmadou Bamba that was taken as a surveillance instrument by colonial authorities is that its enigma, the enigmatic characteristic of the photograph itself, really sort of underscores what people understand as what a face is and how writing is significant. So you'll see the quote from Rumi at the top there: "I've prayed so long, I've become prayer itself." Prayer can be enunciated, it can be spoken, it can be thought in the mind without saying anything, but it can also be written. And the idea that Muslims have of how it was that Allah, God, began the creation with the downstroke of the letter A, the alif, which is a kind of vertical stroke downward, as also the first letter of the holy name of God, Allah, is something that also informs the understanding that Allah writes the faces of all persons. So the composition of the face that we understand from one friend to the next is actually something that's been written by God. And this plays out when one moves from the 1913 photograph on the left to a painting by an artist named Hassan Jun, with whom Polly and I worked very closely, and we brought him to the opening of St. in the City at the Fowler in 2003. His kind of bust painting is even more widely spread these days than the 1913 photograph from which it's derived. And in part, what happens is that in understanding how God writes the faces of all people, that facilitates the translation from an image, a photograph, to a calligram, which you see on the right. So you can tell that the artist who created the calligram as a reverse glass painting, which is worth mentioning because you have to understand how complicated it is to paint something on the back of the glass in order to see it right way around on the front of the glass, which means that the artist had to paint the calligraphy backwards in order to be seen forwards on the front. So this is a kind of translation of the image of Ahmadou Bamba into the Shahada, which is the proclamation of Muslim faith that you'll see in the calligram there. What we're talking about more explicitly is how it is that writing is powerful and prayerful, and that it's often done on prayer boards. So in the middle of the screen is the kind of logo photograph of a Senegalese prayer board that is in the Fowler collections. It was collected for the St. in the City exhibition. On the left is a reverse glass painting by an artist named Gajigo, who is painting a scene which is known to Murid people, the Sufis of Senegal, as the kind of creation, the founding of the holy city of Touba, where Bamba is buried. It's now a pilgrimage city. but he's written out on a prayer board his understanding and the blessings that lead to founding the pilgrimage city, which is now the second largest city in Senegal. When you look at the two prayer boards in the middle and on the right, though, you can see that they've been written upon with a reed stylus, a khalam, as you see at the bottom of the middle picture. But you can also see that there is, in both of these cases, a palimpsest. That means traces. You can see that previous writing has been washed off the board. And we'll talk about what you do with the water that bears the word of God in just a moment. But when you do that, traces of earlier writing are in the surface of the wood. And as those accrue, as they're collected, the baraka blessings of the writing and of the board itself and what one can do with writings that are washed off and used in prayer, but also in healing, that also is building. Palimpsests, that's an interesting and important aspect of prayer boards because it's the trace of previous intentionality, all the kind of use of the boards that leads to increased blessings. I mentioned that the reed stylus, the khalam, is of import because we also had a case study that was not in the exhibition, but in the St. City book about the sacred architecture of this gentleman on the lower left, Sidine Omar Sy, who lived from 1913 until 2018, so he lived 105 years. And he and his men created this most remarkable environment completely out of reed. And that's because the khalam, as a living presence, came to Omar Sy in a vision and asked that it be venerated. And so as a veneration of the stylus with which one writes the words of God, he and his men created this absolutely sublime place of dwelling. But at the same time, if you look at the registers of triangles, Sidine Sy told us that, well, for those people who have moved far enough along their mystical paths, who have learned and overcome veils of ignorance along the way, they know how to read what is written in the reed, R-E-A-D. They can read the reed, R-E-E-D, as it's configured into these triangles, that this is a written place. It's a text, in other words. These are the words of God in a sort of abstracted way, that informed every breath that was taken in this compound. The last picture here is of another way that the words of God are used in healing. And one of the things that was important about the Saint in the City exhibition was the degree to which Polly and I sought and gained the participation of Senegalese friends. So this gentleman seen in the two right-hand pictures, his name is Serigne Bach, and he is a healer and a calligrapher, and he's one of several artists with whom we worked who became so engaged in our project that they started making things and doing things in anticipation of our exhibition. And so for one thing, Serigne Bach made some remarkable prayer papers, which were displayed in the exhibition, but then he also created this device that's in the upper left-hand side that's called an amte. He made it out of half of a Chinese fishing net float. It was cut in half and has a mirror inserted, mirror side up in the bottom of the dish. And then around the side are packets of prayers, but also devices of local healing. So not Muslim practice, but actually local practice of healing and protection. And what happens is that someone will come to Serigne Bach and explain a problem that the person has, an illness or some kind of problem at work or whatever it might be. And then Serigne Bach takes the night to have visions and dreams and to compose a prayer paper that responds to that person's needs. Then the person comes back the next day and water is put into the amte bowl. The prayer paper is scrunched around in the water to release the words of God into the water. The person, the supplicant, the person who's come to Siddin Baj, then looks at his or her own face in the mirror, reflected back through the words of God that are in the water above the mirror. After that's done, the person drinks the water and then shakes any drops that are left on his or her head, because you don't want to waste any blessing of this powerful sort. The thing is that in doing this, in taking unto oneself the words of God, one is actually performing a kind of textual transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is a word more readily known to Catholics because it's the process that occurs in the Eucharist, in Holy Communion, when one takes unto oneself the blood and the body of Christ, and in fact becomes Christ-like in the process. In taking unto oneself the words of God, one becomes a text. So in Siddin Omar Sy's compound, one could live in a text, but then in drinking the word of God, one becomes the text. And that is the most intimate kind of blessing that one can get. And it's powerful in healing and protection and promotion of people. So I will leave it at that and hand the screen over to Amira Hassnaoui, who is, as Bianca said, a graduate student with whom I work very closely in world arts and cultures. And she's doing the most remarkable research. So I will now give the screen to her.
Thank you so much, Elle. As usual, it's always fascinating and refreshing to go over some of your work and material. I'm so thrilled to be here with everyone who's tuning in, wherever you're tuning in from. So just to contextualize, what I'm going to share with you is recent findings from my recent research trip in Tunisia. Now, it is still within the same community that I'm working with, that I've been working with over the past few years, but it's not in particular about the type of work that I'm doing. So I'll share my screen and then go through it. So my research is actually about trance healing music practices in Tunisia, but in particular in Tunis, the capital, and in Tozeur, southern Tunisia. And so it's in trance healing music with communities from sub-Saharan African descent. And this picture that you're looking at right now, it is actually a picture from the household where I spend pretty much most of my time during my research. And it's a shrine of Lilly Endowment, who's a successor of one of the main saints of the Banga community. And where you see here, there is a Quranic board right at the, where I'm like pointing, I hope you can see it, at the tomb. So this literally happened 48 hours before I head back to LA in the summer. And Al knows of the story and an anecdote that I actually went and gathered this material that it's still new to me. I'm still looking into knowing more and understanding more within 24 hours. So the whole trip to the south, pictures and some of the videos I'll show you, it all happened within 24 hours. So this is the Quranic board that I had the chance and honor to actually hold in my hands, look at, and touch. So I found out that big members of my community, actually, this is how they learned the Quran, which is something they don't do anymore across Tunisia, at least from what I could gather. When I went around and asked in the capital, they don't do this anymore. The way I learned Quran was also different, which I'll show you in a bit. But the only communities who learned through these specific boards, so it's a wooden board, and then the ink, it's actually made of sheep and excrement. And the way they do it, I was hoping that I can get into the madrasa, where they actually, it's an institution where they actually train and teach the Quran to kids and also adults, but they teach them differently, that how they recite the Quran, and it has to be done a certain way. So it's made of sheep excrement, and then they add water to it, and it goes through the whole process of melting that, adding the water, say some blessings, and then the ink. And then similarly to one of the photos that Al showed, the wooden pen, very similar to what Al showed, would be used to write. Now, also, it's worth noting that there's a lot of traces underneath this, because it's the same board where people use it over and over again, different verses of the Quran, different surahs, and to rewrite and rewrite. This belongs to one of the very few peoples who are very close to one of the sheikhs who still holds the madrasa. My hope was to go to the madrasa, but I literally went in the middle of the outbreak of the pandemic in Tunisia. COVID was really spreading so fast, and it reached its peak this past summer. So a lot of the things that I was hoping to do, I was not, but I'm still glad that I got the chance to kind of collect some of this material. This is Jaddi Hassan. Jaddi means grandfather. That's what he and I agreed to call him over the past 4 years of my kinship with him. He is the lead figure and master of Banga community. He was here showing me how he actually learned, and he was reading from both the Quran here, the Holy Book of the Quran, but also the Quranic Board. We were sitting in the shrine of Lilly Endowment. I'll show you a quick video. So basically, he was showing me how they would start. The sheikh would actually open the Quran and he would read, and those who are learning would have to take the board and put their pen in ink and start writing what the sheikh would tell them. That's how they memorize it. This is a close-up of the board. So he was explaining to me how he would repeat after the sheikh.
انا نقول الكلمه اللي لا اقسم بيوم القيامه يكتبها يجيب لك يكتب ثاني وانا نعرف مثلا تلميذ ما نعرف لا بعد هذيك نقول لك مثلا عم سيدي نكتب.
Now, obviously, I haven't had time to put subtitles into this, and that's why I'm explaining to you. Interestingly enough, the same day I was very curious to know if there are still other madrasas open where people are still learning, and I was really interested in women learning. And I was lucky enough that I found one madrasa that is open, led by women, and the master is a woman. She was certified by sheikh, and she has a whole gathering of women, and I'll show you a part of their learning session. What was really fascinating to me, that women don't learn through those Quranic boards. They actually write with a pen on papers and then recite. And then the teacher would call them one by one to her office, which I'll show you in a bit. And she would allow them to recite to her personally, where she would correct them if they have a mispronunciation of specific words, because it has to be rhythmic. It has to have a specific tone. And so she is teaching them how to recite. And when she takes them one by one, the rest of the women will be reciting on their own and correcting to one another. And this is what that looks like. This is inside the madrasa, which was open when I went. So this is her. I didn't want to get any closer to interrupt the whole flow of them learning. I was just trying to be as ethical and as respectful as possible. And if you can hear, there's like a specific tone in which she was teaching one of the scholars there how to pronounce certain things. Now, what I would like to do now is actually show you, I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to show you how I personally learned the Quran. What you see here, we call it lawha. It's a board, and let's see here. I hope you can see it. And then I have chalkboard. The way I learned at the madrasa at a very early age. My parents took me there, how I learned the alphabet, Arabic alphabet. And then from learning the Arabic alphabets, which we need to write and read the Quran, that's how we all learn the Quran. So I'm gonna write something. I'm gonna just start by Bismillah, in the name of God. And then our Sheikh would say that, and we would have to write it and repeat it after him. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So that's what it would look like. I'm just so glad that I'm still writing Arabic, even though I've been writing in English for the past years. I don't get a chance to write in Arabic for so long. So this is an opportunity. So we would write it on the board, and then we would repeat after him, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And so we literally would have to actually repeat the same tone that he would say. And if you don't mind me, I would like to take this opportunity and actually read the Fatiha Surah in the memory of my mentor and advisor, the late Polly Roberts. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم ولا الضالين آمين صدق الله مولانا العظيم. I did this with Polly in our class. That was her last class, performing memory, and she brought one of the Quranic memory boards, and she brought it to class, and she passed it around. And I remember vividly, she asked me if I would be able to read it, and it happened to be actually the Fatiha. So I read it in front of the whole class from that exact same board, and I was touching it, and since then I've been every now and then reading the Fatiha for Polly. I will share my last pictures with you. This was at the very end of the day. That day, I found out that there's this specific game which was fascinating to me in relation. I still don't know what to make of that, but I felt like there's a relationship between this game and also some of what perhaps Al mentioned briefly, the khatam that could be found in the Quranic memory boards. Khatam is usually blessings or doing some healing rituals using the Quran for people to heal. So this is Jaddi, that's his brother, and that's Tariq, one of their sons. They're all Benga practitioners and musicians. And I'll just finish this presentation by a picture of me, Jaddi Hassan, and his wife, as we call her, Maya. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you so much, Amira. And Al, thank you very much. We have one question submitted thus far, and we're a little over our time, but we're going to get to some of these questions. We'll do 2 questions. So first question is from Kalechi, and they wonder how you spell the name of the boards. And if one of you can actually type the answer in the Q&A portal or spell it out loud, I'm happy to type it myself.
Can you do that, Amira, please?
Sure, lawh. So I'll write it in the chat. Now, of course, the H is pronounced differently in Arabic, so the ha sound, that's what it is, lawh. So that's what that is. Lawh is the board. It is this one, but it's also that wooden board. I would assume, but they're both called that way. The contemporary modern one, but also the wooden one.
Thank you.
Mm.
Okay, so we have a question about the learning age of the women that you were with. Are young girls also taught? They're noticing that the women that you were in the room with seem to be a little older, and we're wondering if young girls are also taught the Quran.
Would you please repeat? I missed the second part.
So the Tunisian women learning the Quran seem to be middle-aged. Are young girls also taught?
Oh, thank you. From that madrasa, I think most of the women who were there that day were middle-aged, but I did learn, I asked that a lot of other younger girls learn also, but they wouldn't be learning in that specific madrasa. They would be learning in a different madrasa that it's meant to teach young girls. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And are the boards in Senegal also written with sheep excrement or with ink? I think that's a question for you, Al.
They're written, excuse me, they're written with ink, but not composed in the same way that Amira explained. So they're made from pot black, actually, the carbon that accumulates on the bottom of a pot that's cooked over a fire. And that's a sterile kind of carbon, and that's then mixed with water and made into an ink. And it's one of those things where the properties of the ink itself are interesting, not only from how it's derived and how it's made, but also the fact that it is what art historians would call fugitive. It doesn't last long, and so it lends itself to kind of ephemeral ideas of the passing of blessing and the accumulation then of a palimpsest of intentionality on a given board that increases the blessings of using that board.
Thank you. And we have quite a few questions about what happens when the boards are disposed of. How are they disposed of, and are they recharged periodically to maintain their efficacy?
If I were thinking about the Senegalese example, the prayer boards are not disposed of. They're kept and used over and over until the wood, gives out. And then I think that they're basically kept carefully because they do bear the blessings of lots of earlier occasions and all that sort of thing. On the other hand, prayer boards are also now commercialized, so one can purchase them, for instance, with writing on them, but which Polly and I did for the exhibition in a couple of cases. But what was interesting was that the writing was in magic marker instead of that fugitive ink, because commercially you want the ink to stay there, you don't want it to flake off or fade or anything like that. And so that sort of shift of the sort of materiality is indicative of the board no longer serving the same function that it once did.
And are these, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna just weigh in here. Similarly to the Quranic boards in southern Tunisia, when I asked, they don't ever get rid of them. They're used and used over and over again through generations now. Again, like very few of these are actually remaining. So that's another reason for them to hold on to them. And the wood, interestingly enough, they all told me that it's really old wood and it's really good material wood, that it keeps persistent to be really good material that they can use over and over. And that's why for them, like, to keep it and try to maintain its shape as good as possible is one of their missions, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to find that specific type of wood to use it. So yeah, it's kept.
All right, well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you both so much for bringing these brief yet very informative explanations of the Muslim prayer boards and their contemporary uses, and sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate your time today.
Do you mind, Bianca, if I very quickly address that? I think that question came up and I wanted to make sure that I clarify so people don't go with misunderstanding or specific. The excrement, the sheep excrement came up a few times. And as much as it might be thought of as weird or because it's a Holy Quran, I think what really happens is that they don't go specifically for the excrement. It's whatever is stuck on the sheep's skin or so they will take it because, as you may know, we sacrifice sheep for the adha feast or whatever. And so a lot of the parts of the animals, we actually use all of it. We don't leave anything to throw, whatever. Anything is up for recycling. So whatever that they can find in the sheep's skin, they take it. And I think the fact that they add water to it and it's melted and it's used because it's called sumak. And that specific material actually holds really not only clearly, but it stays longer than any other type of ink. And that's the reason they found out why it's better to use that than any other thing that would be erased like with water immediately like that. So I hope that answers some of the questions around that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure they do too. All right. Well, thank you to again, our panelists and to everyone who joined us today. This program has been recorded. It will be available immediately on the Fowler's Facebook for you to check out. In a few days, it will be uploaded to our Instagram and onto our website for you to revisit and share as you wish. And we hope that you'll join us for our next program. You can find details on the closing slide. In the meantime, have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone.